emphatically affirms resolve the United States should end its arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Our first contention is aiding terrorism. El Bagir of CNN writes, Saudi Arabia and its coalition partners have transferred American-made weapons to al-Qaeda-linked fighters, hardline Salafi militias, and other factions fighting in Yemen, warranting that Saudi Arabia partners in the war have used the U.S. faction weapons as a form of currency to buy the loyalties of militias. Landis of the University of Oklahoma quantifies 60 to 80% of the arms we put in the Middle East end up in the hands of terrorists. The International Crisis Group finds al-Qaeda in Yemen is stronger than it has ever been, instigating and thriving off the instability of the nation. The impact is perpetuating the conflict. Foreign policy writes that internal power struggles undermine unity, as doctrinal and strategic disputes continue conflict in the region, undermining peace talks. Our second contention is a crisis in Yemen. The BBC writes that Saudi Arabia and other countries began an air campaign in Yemen aimed at pushing back against the Houthi rebels after they overthrew the government. As a result, Fox explains Saudi Arabia has instigated a deadly conflict in Yemen, leaving thousands of civilians dead and nearly killing 130 per day. Affirming will take away two key U.S. arms. The first are precision-guided missiles. Stone of Reuters reports that the U.S. recently approved the sale of about $7 billion of precision-guided weapons to Saudi Arabia. Problematically, Reuters writes that precision-guided bombs have killed thousands in Yemen. Second, missile defense. The MDAA explains that the Houthi rebels in Yemen have recently developed ballistic missile capabilities. In response, Makias of CNBC writes that in 2018, the Saudis and the U.S. were close to agreeing to a $15 billion deal to acquire Lockheed Martin's Terminal High Air Altitude Defense System, or THAAD. It would embolden Saudi Arabia to be more aggressive, as Clipspringer heritage is very successful, showing a 100% success rate in practice trials. If Saudi Arabia is not able to buy THAAD from the U.S., Houthi missile capabilities will deter Saudi Arabia from over-aggression in Yemen because they'd risk missile attacks in return to their own cities. Saudi Arabia would be unable to continue fighting in Yemen without U.S. arms sales for two reasons. First, the U.S. supplies the bulk of arms. As Dewan of CNN explains, most countries have significantly reduced or completely halted arms sales, partially as a response to Saudi Arabia's actions in Yemen and murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Dewan furthers that over the past 5 years, the U.S. accounted for 61% of major arms sales to the Saudis, with the UK as a distant second with 23%, and France in third place with a mere 4%. Second, no other supplier has sophisticated weapons that Saudi Arabia can use quickly. Way of the Conversation explains that armaments from Russia, China, or elsewhere are simply not as sophisticated as American weapons, and that even if Saudi Arabia switched, once a country is locked into a specific kind of weapon system, the cost to switch to buyers can be huge. Adjusting to new weapon systems takes a long time, as military personnel must be retrained on new equipment, spare parts need to be replaced, and operational changes are necessary. At minimum, this would force Saudi Arabia to halt its offensive campaign in Yemen. Put simply, cutting U.S. arms sales means ending the conflict, which has two impacts. First, halting the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. The UN has deemed Yemen the world's worst man-made humanitarian disaster. Indeed, the U.S. Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project estimates that more than 60,000 civilians and combatants have been killed since 2016. Moreover, one UN official found that over 20 million Yemenis are now food insecure. Second, preventing future conflicts. Affirming does not mean that the U.S. is ending its relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's just cutting off arms sales. Saudi Arabia continues to rely on the U.S. for nuclear protection, oil deals, and cooperation against Iran. This means the U.S. still has leverage over Saudi Arabia, and thus the affirmative sends a clear signal that the U.S. won't tolerate this behavior from Saudi Arabia in the future. Thus, we affirm.
Kate and I negate, and our sole contention is ensuring long-term regional stability. Right now, Yemen is trending towards peace. Stelnick of Reuters in 2018 explains that Congress is taking a bigger role in regulating future arms sales and has taken a move to put a hold on deals that would be used to kill civilians. Walsh of the New York Times furthers in December that peace talks have begun in Yemen, with measures to free prisoners being agreed upon, which Ed Rose of Al Jazeera explains is a positive and encouraging first step that built off previous talks. The end of the Yemen war is in sight. Unfortunately, if we fail to continue selling arms, the region will lose its best chance at stability when other countries step in and fill the vacuum. Indeed, Davies of The Guardian in 2018 explains that if there was a freeze in Saudi-US relations, Riyadh could, for example, simply switch its purchases to other major arms exporters like Russia and China. Pletka of the American Enterprise Institute in 2018 furthers that although systems between US and Russian weapons may be different, Saudi Arabia is so oil-rich they can easily purchase all new weapons from the Russians without a major hassle. Overall, Caverly of the Naval War College in 2018 explains that ceasing to sell arms to Saudi Arabia would rupture our relationship with the country entirely, as our alliance is predicated on arms sales. There are 3 reasons why affirming is dangerous. First is losing pressure on Saudi Arabia. England and the Financial Times reports in October that the Trump administration pushed Saudi Arabia to enter into peace talks. Lang of Axios in November found this external pressure began the peace process currently taking place, and that by threatening to withhold intelligence and logistical support, the Trump administration can force further change in peace. Without the U.S. having this leverage through arms sales, there's no potential for peace in Yemen. Second is preventing Saudi Arabian proliferation. Einhorn of Brookings Institute in 2016 writes that Saudi Arabia is the most likely country in the Middle East to nuclearize. Zhangxi of the Middle East Quarterly explains in 2013 that the U.S. nuclear umbrella is the only deterrent between Saudi Arabia and proliferation. Unfortunately, Arms Control Association in 2018 explains that Saudi proliferation would create a destabilizing arms race in the Middle East, and Robini of The Guardian specifically identifies that if the U.S. no longer guaranteed Saudi Arabia's security, regional powers from Iran to Turkey to Egypt might decide they can only defend themselves with nuclear weapons. Third is preventing a regional war with Iran. Indeed, Polk of the Brookings Institute in 2015 explains that in the absence of American engagement, Gulf states led by Saudi Arabia become scared and lash out against Iran. In fact, Polk writes that the air campaigns in Yemen were an example of a fear of diminishing U.S. engagement in the region. Shinkman further elaborates that in 2015, when Saudi Arabia invaded, Obama began to draw back from the Middle East and told Saudi Arabia to fight their own wars. Polk concludes that in the absence of a strong American presence, the affirmative world, Gulf states will attack Iran. Ostovar Foreign Policy in 2017 furthers, any conflict would grow to involve all states in the Middle East. Preventing the destabilization of the Middle East is crucial. Already, the war in Yemen has, according to Ensor of The Telegraph, killed 60,000 people through military conflict and left 85,000 dead through starvation. To end the tragedy that is the Yemen war and to stop future conflicts, we proudly negate.
Do you mind if I have first question? Okay, starting time now. So you talked about Russia stepping in and like supplying Saudi arms, right?
Yeah.
So who is Russia currently supplying arms to?
Okay, so you're gonna give me this analysis that Russia's like allies with Iran, so they won't sell to Saudi Arabia, right?
I mean, I would say that it's like contradictory to their foreign
Yeah, so
policy.
the problem is, like, in the past, Putin has showed that he consistently doesn't care who he's allies with when it comes to selling his arms. And a great example of this is back in 2012, he sold offensive missile capabilities to both Saudi Arabia and then to Iran. So historically, Putin has shown that he doesn't really care who, like, his allies are and what they think of each other. He just wants, like, more money for his arms.
So I would just say that you can't rely on, like, for someone to step in long term to supply your arms if they're supplying, like, both sides of a civil war. I would say that you're going to, like, prefer our side as the U.S. as a much more, like, more stable arms supplier, so when you cut that off, you still see a net decrease.
No, so
that being said, do you have a question?
The problem is, like, Putin consistently sells arms. It's not just, like, one sale in 2012. Like, he recently signed deals, like, last year. Like, he's shown long-term.
I mean, I would say that, like, his end game alliance is going to ultimately be with Iran, which means that if he's going to be forced to choose, he's going to choose Iran.
Historically,
and if there's going to be like an all-out war in the Middle East, like you suggest, he's going to be forced to choose eventually. I mean, he's not going to get it. He's not going to be able to get away with supporting both sides.
I would argue that Putin,
that's
like,
not how like international alliances work.
I would argue he profits off of war, and I mean his past actions show he don't care. But let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So on your idea about like this peace in Yemen, right? You say
I don't talk about peace in Yemen.
Or like your idea of like how removing U.S. arms would create like
would
decrease
take away
Yemen.
Saudi
Yeah,
capability.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. So you talk about like missile defense, right?
Yeah.
And you say that we've sold them THAAD.
No, that we're about to sell them THAAD.
So your argument, right, is that we should let Saudi Arabia get bombed by Houthi missiles?
No. So my argument is that right now, Saudi actions in Yemen are making it so that Houthi rebels want to bomb them. However, we prevent that over-aggression when we don't sell them THAAD because the Saudis don't feel protected. Can I ask you a question?
So wait, so your argument, right, is that Houthi rebels want to bomb Saudi Arabia. So
only because of the human rights atrocities that Saudi Arabia is
in the affirmative world, if Saudi Arabia keeps up its military capabilities and keeps bombing in the region, right, that means that Houthi rebels still want to attack Saudi Arabia, right?
I would say that that's not going to happen. So can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Awesome. So let's talk about China. Has China shown a big military interest in the Middle East?
China?
Yeah.
I think our argument is more about Russia.
Okay, so it's more about Russia.
I mean, I'd argue both of them cooperatively can fill in the gap that the U.S. leaves behind.
So they're gonna collude with each other, or they're independently gonna do it?
No, Russia and China
But Russia and China are the big actors that you're advocating about. You're not gonna come up in second rebuttal and be like the UK is gonna do it.
No,
too.
I would argue there's multiple people that can fill. It doesn't have to be one country filling the gap.
So countries are gonna start to feel bad for Saudi Arabia and be here's all our weapons.
It's a bigger market for them to make money.
Okay.
Is everybody ready? So a lot of their cases contingent on the idea that when arms sales end, the United States and Saudi Arabia alliance ends altogether. We would say that even when arms sales end, there are still 4 ways in which the United States and Saudi Arabian alliance stays together. First is oil. As Eka Bloom of CNN explained, that the United States still imports 7.9 billion barrels of foreign crude oil per day from Saudi Arabia, the second largest exporter to the United States. And the Organization for Economic Complexity finds that 10% of Saudi Arabia's total export to the United States of oil. That's really important because they still rely on us economically. Second, they're under our nuclear umbrella. As Gilbert of Davidson explained, that the United States has given a nuclear guarantee to Saudi Arabia that they'll protect them from any nuclear attack, so we still have security interests. Third, military bases. The United States has multiple military bases in Saudi Arabia right now. We're doing so much interest to protect them and support them in the region. We're just not selling arms. And fourth, econ. Walls of the New York Times explains that the Saudi Arabian government has $250 billion of assets in the United States economy right now. What does this mean? It means, one, the alliance doesn't go away when you vote for my opponent. All it does is actually give us more leverage. It shows that when we end arms sales because of the human rights abuses in Yemen, it shows Saudi Arabia that we're not afraid to cash in on our leverage and actually use it. They say we lose leverage, but we're not using our leverage right now. The only way to show Saudi Arabia that we actually care about human rights abuses and make them stop is cashing in our leverage, but staying odds with them, so if they try in the future, we can take away more advantages. But with that, then they give you this idea that we can split Saudi Arabia, if the United States doesn't have arms, can pivot to Russia. We take 2 problems here. One, Russia's an ally of Syria, who's literally fighting against Saudi Arabia, and Russia has with Syria, and they support Iran, who is literally Saudi Arabia's mortal enemy. They say that Russia sold offensive capabilities to 2 different sides. We'd say there's a big difference between selling some missiles to both sides and literally converting Saudi Arabia's entire weapon system to that of Russia, because that's what Guai tells you. Right now, they're fully integrated with the U.S. They expect that Russia will fully integrate Saudi Arabia's weapon system to be with Russian missiles, which would mean that they're fighting both sides of the war. That doesn't make any sense for them. Which is why the Stockholm International Peace Treaty finds that Russia supplies so little arms to Saudi Arabia right now that they're not even in Saudi Arabia's arms database. Which is why, third, even if you don't buy that, Hill explains that actually United States planes specifically are doing refueling, are supplying spare parts to Saudi Arabia that allows their airstrikes to kill 130 civilians every single day. When you vote for us, that goes away. But then they give you 3 reasons why it's better. First, they say that when we end arms sales, we lose our pressure. Again, we say the opposite. We still give you 4 ways in which we have leverage over Saudi Arabia, even if arms sales end. It's actually the opposite. opposite of what my opponents say. When arms sales end, we show Saudi Arabia we're not afraid to use our leverage, that when they're doing bad stuff, we actually pressure them on it. And there will they continue to support Saudi Arabia. Then later on, they also say that there's peace and that peace in the region is on the way because there were talks last year. But after those talks last year, in January, the Houthi rebels, it literally broke the ceasefire 500 times. And in 1 week in December, Saudi Arabia broke the ceasefire 50 times. There's no chance of peace happening right now. The only way to get peace to happen is the United States to use our economic and military leverage to get Saudi Arabia to do so. They don't prove any probability of that in their world. Then they say that Saudi Arabia will proliferate. 2 problems here. First, on intent. Saudi Arabia has no reason to proliferate. If they did, the entire world would sanction them. Same thing that the entire world did with Iran that got them to stop proliferating. Everyone hates them, they won't do it. But second, capability. You can't just move a magic wand and make nuclear weapons. It takes years of lots of money, and you have to find people to sell uranium to them. There's no actors in the world who want to sell uranium to Saudi Arabia. That's why they wouldn't be able to if they could. But third, remember, they're still under the United States nuclear umbrella. We still have a nuclear guarantee with them. Then they say that this will cause Saudi Arabia to lash out more in the region because they're scared. Recognize how little sense this makes. When Saudi Arabia gets weaker, they're less likely to lash out because Saudi Arabia does not want to lose to Iran. That'd be really embarrassing. So if they get weaker, they're less likely to engage in conflict with Iran throughout the region because that would be an embarrassing political loss. Rather, what happens is that when the Saudi military gets weaker, they're less capable of committing these human rights abuses. Even if they prove that Saudi Arabia has more intent to fight in our world, if they have less capability to commit human rights abuses, then you should still see an easy Aff ballot, and that's what I'm proud to affirm.
Down their case. Okay, to start off on the first contention, they talk about state-sponsored terrorism. There's one really big issue here, which is that groups like ISIS aren't currently getting their arms from Saudi Arabia or the United States. Al Jazeera reports in 2017 that 90% of ISIS weapons originated from other countries. That means that only a minority of their weapons originated from Saudi Arabia, which were mostly collected due to looting or other measures, not trade. Here's why. Slaughter, the Belfast Center of the International Affairs of 2016, specifically identifies multiple assassination attempts against Saudi Arabia's leadership as to why Saudi Arabia's leadership does not currently support terrorism at all. Thus, they don't have an incentive to fund terror, which is why they're not doing it. Now let's move on to their second contention, starting with their first warning about precision-guided missiles. The big problem here is that McCaskill of The Guardian finds in 2016 that Saudi Arabia is already using the United States super precise missiles just to go target civilians. That either means that A, our tech isn't accurate, or B, our tech is accurate, but Saudi Arabia doesn't take the necessary precautions. That means that the fact that their precise is irrelevant. If another country just sells the missiles, they're still going to use it to target civilians. But then move on to their second warrant when they talk about missile defense. The big problem here is that Bromfield in 2018 further elaborates that Saudi Arabia has purchased Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, meaning that Saudi Arabia is going to have comprehensive missile defense even in a world without U.S. arms sales to the region. That takes out that warrant. But now let's go into the third section when they talk about how other countries are ceasing to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. The big problem here is that their evidence here is outdated. The news reports on January 3rd that the Spanish government, for instance, is planning to sell arms sales they previously suggested that they would freeze. Al Jazeera furthers in 2018 that the UK and France are not planning to cut off sales since Saudi Arabia represents more than 50% of their total arms exports. Other countries are going to fill in the gap if the United States gets out of there. And then finally, let's go into their last warrant when they tell you that we're currently locked into these systems. The big problem here is that in the short term and the long term, Saudi Arabia is still going to have the capability to continue the fight. In the short term, Knights of the Washington Institute finds in 2018 that stopping arms sales would not slow Saudi Arabia's current rate of their air campaign, and they could continue for several years without any more precision-guided missiles sold from the United States. But second off, in the long term, what we would contend is Saudi Arabia is just going to easily switch to buying weapons from another country, and Plekka, the American Enterprise Institute, says that because Saudi Arabia is so oil-rich, they could easily make this shift. This is exactly what Egypt did when we cut them off in 2013. Basically, when we told Egypt in 2013 we weren't going to sell them like airplanes anymore, they just transitioned to Russia, which is now the system they're using currently, which took only about 2 years to change. They come up here and tell you that Russia is never going to sell to Saudi Arabia because Russia is allied with Syria and Iran. The problem here is that in the status quo, like the United States, for instance, sells arms to both Israel and Saudi Arabia, which are sworn enemies. Basically, when countries sell weapons to other countries, they don't do so because of the geopolitics. Russia specifically just wants a greater market presence in the region, which is why they're going to go sell Saudi Arabia these weapons. But finally, let's go into their two impacts. On the first impact about how civilians are dying, we'd agree. We just say their world makes the problem worse. And on their second impact about leverage, the problem here is that we already have leverage in the status quo. According to The Guardian on the 30th of January, Reuters reports just a day ago that Yemen's warring parties have reached a preliminary compromise on how to implement a truce in Yemen. That's really crucial because it means that peace is near. The problem is that Edward Lang evidence from Case says the reason that Saudi Arabia is coming to the negotiating table right now is because the U.S. cut off their air refueling back in November. So Saudi Arabia knows that we have a real threat. The problem is that if we cut off our arms sales directly, the Arab world no longer has any leverage. Because of the Defense Security Monitor finds in 2018 that, for instance, when the U.S. tried to put pressure on Egypt and LCC's military intervention by cutting arms sales to get leverage over them, it didn't change anything because they simply turned to countries like France and Russia. So basically, we lose any influence in the Arab world that we may have had by choosing a way to take away the only leverage that we currently have in the status quo. Now to just quickly frontline a response they put on my third one about regional war, they tell you that Saudi Arabia is weaker, they won't lash out. But remember, in the short term, due to the stockpiles, they still have the exact same capabilities. When we tell you that historically, whenever the United States pulls back a little bit, Saudi Arabia gets very afraid that Iran is going to come in and go after them, so they go after them preemptively, which is why our impact still stands. So at the end of the day, you're always going to be voting for our case over theirs because we affect more people. As Pollock explains, because of the current Saudi invasion into Yemen, was Saudi Arabia's fear of Obama's drawback from the region in 2015. Basically, in 2015, Obama said we're getting our military out of there, and we don't really want to help you with Iran anymore. So basically, what he concludes is if U.S. presence disappeared all the way by ending these arms sales, Saudi Arabia would still threaten to feel the need to go after Iran directly. So if you don't want to see a bigger war in the Middle East, that would affect all the 246 million people living there right now. Vote nay.
I read across.
Yeah.
Alright. Is that ready? So could you envision a world in which like Saudi Arabia sold something to Iran, like a weapon system?
I'd say no.
Right. So you told me that like you said an applicable example to Iran and Saudi Arabia is Israel and Saudi Arabia. But then you tell me that Israel sold weapons defense to Saudi Arabia.
No,
so clearly they're not the same.
No, you misunderstand my example. I'm telling you that the United States sells weapons to both Israel and Saudi Arabia, both of whom are enemies with each other.
But they're not fighting each other in the same conflict. That's the issue, right?
No,
this would be Russia. Wait, why is that not different?
We're saying that the countries, when they go sell arms to other nations, don't do so based on who's allied with who, just because they want to sell the weapons and like get.
No, like in the abstract it might be true, but the issue is that Iran and Saudi Arabia are literally fighting each other in two distinct places.
I agree that they're fighting each other, but we tell you that Russia doesn't care. For instance, back in I think 2013, Russia told Iran that they weren't going to sell Saudi Arabia this specific offensive missile system, but they went and sold it to Saudi Arabia and sold it to
Again, but I think
don't really care what's going on.
I just think there's a pretty big difference between like there's one thing to sell a couple of one system, but you literally tell me that Russia is going to be the fully integrated entire military system of Saudi Arabia. I think it's unlikely they can play both sides like that.
To win our impacts, we don't take out your case. We don't need to win that point. We just need to say that they are going to go in and go sell the airplanes to Saudi Arabia, which is what we
why?
said.
No, because why's the whole point is that it's really hard to switch to another country, which delays the Saudi Arabia's capability to
Egypt, for instance, when they switched from U.S. systems to Russian systems between 2013 and 2015, did so in the space of 2 years.
Yeah, but Egypt wasn't in a war, right? Like Egypt's capability may have been okay, but Saudi Arabia is fighting now.
You're talking about training, which applies in both worlds, whether you're in a war or not.
Well, no, it's like the actual physical computer systems, it's the actual airplanes they're using, it's the actual like physical.
And we're telling you that Egypt did the exact same transition, and we're able to do so in the space of 2 years, not decades.
But they weren't in a war.
Okay, so how does a war change whether you can transition?
Because they're literally fighting every day, right? It's really hard to like train to like switch to a whole new system when you're literally using that system every single time.
Sure. Do you have a question for me? Or no? Or is that your question?
I asked you last one, so I mean your call.
Okay, so let's talk about in response at the very end of your rebuttal. You tell me that the Houthis are currently breaking the peace deals multiple times.
Both sides are, yeah.
Okay, so your evidence all dates back to like November, December of last year.
I think January was when the ceasefire was broken.
Great. So then what happened most recently in Yemen?
They probably signed another ceasefire and they're going to break it again in a couple weeks.
No, what we tell you specifically is that the ceasefire has been maintained for multiple weeks, but also for the first time
multiple weeks, like that's our bright line now? Like it's a ceasefire, right? The last one's maintained for a couple of weeks, then they broke it. You don't prove me why this is different.
The United Nations says that for the first time, Saudi Arabia is actually intent on reaching an end to the war in Yemen. And that's the uniqueness of the current situation.
The
reason we give you why is because the U.S. cut off their air over fuel.
Wait, so we're saying that empirically cutting off things that Saudi Arabia gets them to make peace?
Only if you cut off parts of it. If you cut off a nation entirely, because they make small tweaks and they get Saudi Arabia to make small changes. But if you look to what
ending the war in Yemen is a big change, right? I feel like your example gives us the warrant into why our argument is true.
But back when we tried to do the same thing to Egypt and cut off their arms sales entirely, Egypt just stopped listening to us because they could go buy weapons from another country.
I mean, they weren't in a war, right?
We were protesting the way that Egypt's government at the time came to power through a military.
I'm saying you give me an example of our side working.
Okay.
Can we see the ceasefire
that is different this time?
off my opponent's case, they never touch the 4 reasons Tucker tells you why the alliance between Saudi Arabia and the United States would never end. First on oil, second on nuclear capability, third on military bases, and fourth on linked economies. At this point, they can't link their own offense because they never get linked into the fact that Saudi Arabia will be more scared once the United States leaves. But then we can also leverage to stop them from using future wars once we use this leverage to stop them from engaging in Yemen. But then on one of the easiest places you can vote, which is on terrorism. They tell you that groups like ISIS don't get their arms from Saudi Arabia. Not once in our case do we talk about ISIS. We give you Al-Bagir, who tells you that Saudi Arabia sells arms to groups like Al-Qaeda in Yemen to buy their loyalty so they have more fighters in Yemen. This is really important because what Landis tells you is that 60 to 80% of the arms that the United States pumps into the Middle East goes to groups like Al-Qaeda. This is really important because Al-Qaeda is the most powerful that has ever been in Yemen. This is important for 2 reasons. 1, as long as there's a terrorist group that's really strong in Yemen, we'd say that the conflict is really likely to go on for a really long time. But 2, terrorist groups thrive off and instigate instability. As long as there's instability in the region, as long as there's a terrorist group that's really strong in the region, we'd say that peace talks are doomed to fail. But then on the second way, you could really clearly vote for the affirmative, which is going to be on Yemen. They give a bunch of responses here. First, they say that the Spanish and the UK and France are going to come in. First, the UK says that they're going to cut back on selling weapons. This is the Dewan evidence. But second, Spain and France account for less than 5% of Saudi weapons. That's also the Dewan evidence. Then they say that Russia's going to sell weapons. Remember, Russia sells so little weapons right now that it doesn't even count on the international database. But Guai also tells you that it takes such a long time that Saudi Arabia would be forced to halt their offensive. They also give you night. But remember what we tell you with the Hill that says you need spare parts from the United States to keep these militaries going. At the end of the day, these airstrikes from the Saudis are killing 130 children every day. And this outweighs my opponent's case on probability. Because they never give you the probability as long as they never answer the overview from Tucker about the United States alliance leaving. Thank you, and that's why we're very proud to affirm.
Start on our third warrant about a regional war. They try to say they give one response. It says that this argument doesn't make sense because Saudi Arabia wouldn't want to lose to Iran. The problem is, this is literally the thesis of our argument, right? If Saudi Arabia feels like they've reduced capabilities, they think they are going to lose to Iran, and that causes them to lash out against Iran. Empirically, this happened back in 2015. The reason Saudi Arabia lashed out against Yemen was because there was a decreased U.S. presence during that time. Historically, this is actually true. You outweigh using this warrant for 2 reasons, on magnitude and scope. Because as Ostovar tells you, if Saudi Arabia lashes out against Iran, it would drag all the countries in the Middle East into the conflict. This means that the conflict is 1, way greater, and 2, a direct country-on-country war, which is way deadlier than a proxy war. Now let's go to their case, first on terrorism. Remember that Saudi Arabia leadership hate Al-Qaeda. The real reason Al-Qaeda gets these weapons is because of, they grab them in battle. But even more importantly, their impacts, right, are about, making peace not happen because terror creates instability. But they never contest the Reuters evidence that Kate gives you in rebuttal in their own summary, because Reuters tells you just yesterday peace is working. This is very unique, because up until yesterday, there's been no point in the war where the 2 sides agreed on a preliminary truce, but they have just yesterday, right? That grants us that the status quo is working, so if you would negate, you keep the status quo, and you have peace in Yemen, which takes out their entire second contention. But even on their second contention, there's a couple reasons why Russia and China fill the gap. They say, 1, that Russia sells so little right now, but our argument right now is that Russia can only sell a little right now because the U.S. sells the rest, right? Russia isn't going to sell a lot if the U.S. is selling a lot. Then they say that the UK says they will cut back. But the problem is, the evidence Kate reads you in rebuttal post-dates this evidence and says that the UK will continue to sell arms to Saudi Arabia. You can call it yourself. At that point, then they say on the stockpiles evidence that they need spare parts. But the problem is, remember, the affirmative just means no more arms sales. Our previous arms sales, where Lockheed Martin says, here's a contract and we'll sell spare parts for 10 years, still exist. Short-term, they have capability. Long-term, they have Russia.
Alright. Do you mind if is everyone ready? Do you mind if I ask a question? Okay. So when you say Saudi Arabia lashes out at Iran, like, paint me a picture. Like, what does this look like?
Yeah, basically back in
So they start more conflicts, like actual conflicts.
Yeah.
So why would you be more likely to start a conflict if you think you're less likely to win?
No, so the problem is Saudi Arabia, when it lashes out, doesn't think it's less likely to win, right? It says,
just think they're
look,
weaker?
we have, no, it says, we can't perceptually lose to Iran in the region, so we have to lash out.
So we're
because
gonna
not
lose more
paranoid.
conflicts? That sounds like a terrible
That's
strategy.
not what
It's
Saudi
also
Arabia
just-
thinks.
It's also
Wait.
to some degree just preemption, because they think that whenever the U.S. is like military aid or military presence declines a little bit,
Awesome.
they worry that Iran is going to go
So
after
you
them
guys need
first,
to
which is why
respond
they're
to this
going Yemen.
defensive overview, right?
That says that we still have military bases there. Like I'm like
No,
you go
it's-
you go all in on winning this round of like Saudi Arabia lashing out in the future.
Can I clarify?
If they get
Can I
weaker, they
clarify?
can't do that.
The link into this is not the absolute value of like how much presence the United States has. It's any perceived decline from current levels is
Any
what caused.
perceived decline.
Yeah,
That's
that's
such
what we're
a
arguing.
low
That's what
white
happened in
line.
2015.
That Saudi Arabia should have already started World War
That-
III right
That's
now.
why we are in Yemen right now as of 2015.
Yeah, I mean,
because
but
US presence
I'm like
declined.
the issue with the argument that say it's like really short term, right? Because if they have less weapons, sure they can maybe lash out for a few months, but eventually they have less capability.
That's where
That's
Ostervar
Ostervar
comes
comes in, right? Because he says, if you have that initial lash out, it still drags in all the other countries in the Middle East, and that creates this big war.
Wait, I mean, like, is every single country in the Middle East involved in Yemen?
Yes, that's what's called the Saudi-led coalition of about.
Okay,
many other
so it's
states
still just
in
Saudi
the
Arabia versus Iran, right? It's not
No,
like
no,
every
no.
Saudi
Saudi
Arabia
like,
plus their coalition who
Yeah,
is supporting
the
them.
coalition
Okay, that's
bombing
fine.
as
Okay.
part with
Hang on,
like.
so can we ask you a question now?
Yeah, please.
So what happens tomorrow if the United States stops arms sales today in terms of Saudi Arabia's planes?
They can't fix the
Well, we
spare
would say
parts.
that, like, sure, like, the planes may work for a while, but when they need, like,
Yeah.
plane parts.
Like the
spare
Hill tells you
parts-
that the planes break down really fast, and they
Yeah.
keep buying
Yeah.
spare parts. To
Like,
fix them.
tomorrow, the planes probably work.
The problem here is that like, what Nikhil brings up in summary is that when Lockheed Martin or the United States government sells them a plane, they also say that Lockheed Martin will maintain the plane for the duration of the lifespan.
No,
At
no,
best,
no,
you impact out to not selling.
No,
No,
I mean,
no,
I
no,
think
no,
it's
that's
really
pretty
interpretation,
abusive
right? Like,
No,
I don't
that's-
think we
it's
would.
not
Lockheed
that.
Martin won't be able to continue to sell arms if we put.
No, no,
if
but
we
Yeah,
you
say
said
but
that
not
the
the
current planes in the
argument.
region are like set.
It's
essentially
like
selling
the
plane
same
with a
way,
warranty.
right? If I buy something expensive, I get a warranty. It's like the same
No,
thing,
but-
right?
but wait, if, like,
the-
Yeah, but like if I buy an iPhone from Apple and then get banned from the Apple store, I won't be able to go back into
But
the
okay,
Apple
you
store
told me
and
that
buy
the-
another phone.
You're telling me that the alliance still stands, right? All we're doing
But
is
arms
ending.
sale-
All we're doing is ending future arms sales. But the arms sales
Yeah.
currently in place, and the conditions with them are still also. going
I,
on.
like, I would just say like it's really unlikely that if Congress passed a bill banning arms sales, that Saudi Arabia would call up Lockheed Martin and said, "Hey, our plane's
Yeah,
broken. Can we
because
buy parts to fix
the
it?"
app world bans future arms sales,
Yeah.
and the
Yes.
app world
No
also
more
says the
selling of
alliance
the
is
spare
still there.
parts.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
not
that's
selling
like
more
future.
spare parts. They're like all the previous arms sales still exist.
So it comes
Okay.
with like
and the
extra
contracts
parts for
with the
when
spare
plane
parts
goes.
Like a little
included
side fucking
still exist. It's not that complicated.
Alright. We're on the rest of it. Alright.
We'll run the rest of our press time.
I'm sorry, I can cut that. Do you have a card that they hate Al Qaeda?
Yeah, sure. It's the card on the left of the screen.
recognize that the big thing they go for and the only way they can actually win the round is on the idea that Saudi Arabia lashes out when arms sales end. Two big problems with this. One, recognize how illogical it is. If Saudi Arabia's military capabilities go down, they are less likely to lash out in the region because they themselves tell you they don't want to look weak in the eyes of Iran. Starting a war and losing it is literally how you look weak, right? If they have less capabilities, then they're less likely to start pointless conflicts. They're less likely to lose. And even if they lash out a little bit, they're less likely to do more conflicts overall. But second, U.S. leverage, right? They don't respond at all to any of our overview. So you can so see that the United States will still have leverage over Saudi Arabia if we end arms sales. That's really important because if Saudi Arabia wants to start a conflict and the United States tells them not to, and we say we'll cut something if they do, they'll actually believe us this time because they know that we've cut arms sales in the past when you vote pro. Our leverage is a lot better when you vote for us because it shows Saudi Arabia that we won't back down, that we mean business, that they can't keep committing human rights abuses. We use that leverage to stop them from doing other conflicts in the region. That's the best thing to stopping not just Yemen, but every other future conflict. But then, another way you can feel comfortable voting for us is on terrorism. They just say that Saudi Arabia doesn't like Al-Qaeda, and their card just says that Saudi Arabia tells people they don't. But Al-Bagir is very clear that they secretly sell these arms to Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups in Yemen. They don't tell people about it because that makes them look bad, but they still do it. And that's the problem, which right Landis tells you that 60 to 80% of all of the weapons that go to the Middle East end up in the hands of terrorists. That's really bad, because we say this creates, one, terrorism is bad in and of itself because it leads to death, but two, it creates instability. Terrorist groups create and thrive off instability. Any sort of peace agreement they make is a lot harder to achieve if there's a lot of instability in the region. When you solve terrorism, you decrease that. But then the peace agreement. They say that they've never agreed to a ceasefire before. Let me tell you, they agreed to a ceasefire a couple months ago, and they broke it 500 times. There's no actual reason why this is different. They just have one person who says, oh, I hope it'll be different from yesterday. We don't really know. The best way to ensure that the Saudis continue to follow this peace agreement is by ending arms sales to show them that they have to. Then, looking at their at the rest of the case, they just say that other countries can supply weapons. But they don't interact with Guai, who tells you that the process of switching from one weapons integrated system to another will delay Saudi Arabia's military capabilities and prevent them from bombing people. That's really important because right now they kill 110 civilian children every day. When you vote for us, you stop that from happening.
Ready? So order is going to be Caire, Yemen, Arthur. Is everyone ready? I'm going to do terrorism one last time. The reason why we study that the Saudi government is not fighting Al-Qaeda is because the Saudi royal family face assassination attempts by Al-Qaeda. They really don't like terrorism. That's why we argue that the reason that terrorists have so many U.S. weapons is through just battle capture alone. But the impact they give you off of this is hurting the peace deal. The writers tells you that in the status quo, Saudi Arabia and Yemen have reached for the first time a truce, and for the first time in the history of negotiations, Saudi Arabia is actually interested in coming to the table. That means that, first off, terrorism is not undermining current peace talks, but second off, if you let the situation play out in the status quo, we're going to end the war in Yemen. Even if you don't buy that, let's go into the internal link into the decreasing civilian deaths, which is the idea that Saudi Arabia will have less weapons in a world where the U.S. doesn't sell them. The first problem with this is they completely drop the Knight's analysis, which is that in the short term, Saudi Arabia is going to have the ability to continue their current air campaign for years due to both the currently existing U.S. warplane sales, but also the stockpiles they built up. But then second off, in the long term, that they're just going to shift to a country such as Russia. We give you the example of Egypt, which made the pivot from a United States system to Russian systems in the space of 2 years through their warplanes. That means that they have no offense coming off of their case. You can pretty cleanly vote for us off of our third war when we talk about regional war. But Pollock tells you that the thesis of this argument is that whenever Saudi Arabia fears that U.S. presence or that the U.S. is protecting them less, Saudi Arabia lashes out against Iran preemptively because they don't want Iran to come to them first. The first response they extend to the final focus is that this is illogical, but the problem is that Saudi Arabia views Iran as a life or death threat, and also they're going to be maintaining their current capabilities in the status quo even if the U.S. cuts off their arms sales, meaning that they can go launch this war. The second response they extend to this is they tell you that the United States has leverage, so we're never going to let them go to war. But look back at Yemen. The United States never used their leverage against Yemen because because the United States only comes in and tries to stop conflicts after they begin. That means that if you vote for the Arab world and Saudi Arabia gets paranoid and lashes out against Iran, first off, you see a war directly between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But second off, what also tells you is that the other countries in the region are going to come in to try and back up Saudi Arabia, which turns the local war into a regional war, which is really bad because that affects all these 246 million people living in the region. So at the end of the day, even if you give them their entire piece about Yemen, we still pretty clean the outweigh by causing a bigger war that didn't need to happen in the first place. Thank you.
Did they do that or not? Yeah, I don't know if they did it in person. Relationship, this is all the responsibility. So like A2 net relationship goes away. 1, they become an enemy. 2, Saudi Arabia's program supplies, which is expensive. 3, economic relationships like the foreign assets and then like Saudi oil exports. 2nd, when Obama suspended arms sales in 2017, and thus in order to make sure the relationship was there, they bolstered other kinds of allied supports. So when you set the military bases, 2 years with nuclear umbrella, what else? And I was thinking maybe lobbyists, because Trump is fucking corrupt, and then Israel might be hey, don't pull out of Saudi Arabia. And the Israel lobby is super powerful. And then on empirics, there was the oil embargo and 9/11, and then nothing else happened. Can you think of anything else? Because if you read this, that's just
You're done.
over. If you as a flow judge, you get through all of this and they give a line by line, then you're just
The new strat.
yeah.
I also want to write out a big internal link chain, a good internal link chain for Yemen, on Aff specifically, because every side is just peace talk, peace talk, peace talk. And
No, you please talk. I thought that was Jeff.
I did too. Oh, I just want to end a pretty big, a minute-long overview on how, each side solves Yemen. Because I feel the debate will always come down to who solves Yemen. So, I want, to spend a minute in my summary about, who solves Yemen. I think that, in Yemen rounds, it's always so muddled. No one really knows. I just want to, handle that.
And the good and bad thing is you don't have to do all case staircase, you can just do Yemen and then you have a lot of time to do any other random extensions there.
So it ended up 2-1 for the con side.
So who is pro? So you
Hi.
are first.
I felt that you guys did a good job with the issues you brought up with crisis in Yemen. I didn't feel that the concept touched a lot on the why there's still an alliance between the United States and Saudi Arabia with the nuclear umbrella, the military bases, economic standpoint, stuff like that. So that's why I went on.
I just really appreciated the cons use of historical examples. I mean, I'm a history major, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I feel like they were very strong. With the Egypt example, with Russia, with Saudi Arabia lashing out onto Yemen, I feel like all those were really strong warrants. And I feel like so far in this tournament, I have seen very few neg teams bring up the argument of tweaking and using your leverage little by little rather than all or nothing. Like, my issue with this resolution so far has been that people go about this very like all or nothing, but you kind of handled it well where you said, like with the example with the planes, taking that out brought in more peace negotiations. I feel like that was really strong and showed that despite us still selling arms, I guess you missed the decision. You guys won. Anyway.